Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a wonderful edition of the True Life Podcast. I hope whether you are in a winter wonderland or you happen to find yourself where the sun is shining and the birds are singing and the wind is at your back, regardless of where you are, I hope you realize that you have some gifts around you and you can bathe in their warmth. I have an incredible show for you today with the one and only Reverend Dr. Jessica Rochester. She is the Madrinha and president of the Sud de Montréal, a Santo Daime Ayahuasca church she founded in 1997 in Montreal, Canada. She's a transpersonal counselor, trained in the work of Dr. Roberto Assagioli and trained with Dr. Stanislav Grof. She worked with Health Canada from 2000 to 2017 to achieve a Section 56 exemption to import and serve the Santo Daime Sacrament. She's an ordained Interfaith Minister with a Doctorate in Divinity. From 1986 to 2018, she has been a workshop leader, teacher, and in private practice. She is the author of Ayahuasca Awakening, A Guide to Self-Discovery, Self-Mastery, and Self-Care, Volume 1 and Volume 2. She continues to lecture on consciousness, non-ordinary states of consciousness, self-discovery, spiritual development, health and well-being, and personal transformation. She's on a mission to inspire and empower those who seek the adventure of self-discovery, those who hope to awaken consciousness, to rediscover authenticity, to find meaning in everyday life, and cultivate deep connections with oneself and others and with nature. Dr. Jessica, we are so thankful you're here today. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you for having me. It's always a joy to be on your show. We wander around on so many wonderful topics. I hope it's interesting for the listening public. And today we agreed to talk about some interesting things, some things that only I find a few people are talking about. And so I'll give a shout out to them in a moment. So I want to talk about vulnerability, okay? And how it's really an issue that has to be addressed for people who are working in non-ordinary states of consciousness on both sides, for the participant and for the practitioner. Okay, so I'm just going to put that umbrella over it. So that can be inclusive of ritual leaders. It can be inclusive of therapeutic and research use, clinical use. Okay, so it's inclusive that for participants, whether it's in a congregation or a research study, and for the practitioner, whether it is an elder or a senior in a ritual of a heritage tradition or religious tradition, or whether it is a researcher or practitioner, clinician in a clinic, that we need to just kind of have a little look at vulnerabilities on both sides and understanding where does that take everybody to, what guidelines are needed for individuals and teachers and guides. And so we've talked a lot about ethics, and kind of what we haven't talked about so much is kind of two pieces of that. You know, I've been tossing out ethic codes. People are interested, go to my website, go to our church website, you know, go to the paper we published, Entheogenic and Psychedelics in Canada, Proposal for a New Paradigm. We drafted up a suggested a code of ethics for people who are working in the field. So there's, you know, at this point, there's lots of good information around, you know, ethics and how to conduct yourself and what kind of guidelines, but vulnerability and what it means in the non-ordinary state of consciousness, because vulnerability is super heightened. You know, anybody going into a situation, whether it's a yoga class or, you know, an ayahuasca ceremony or a Santo Daime church, whatever, there's going to be a certain level of vulnerability because I'm opening myself up in a community or in a public forum. And, you know, what is that for me, and how does the practitioner, how does all that vulnerability get managed? And what's the responsibility of the participant, and what's the responsibility of the practitioner? So, you know, there's one thing between, you know, going into kind of starting a new yoga class, there's another going into a new therapist's office. There's all these different levels of vulnerability. And the more the practitioner understands that a code of ethics and ethical conduct is there to protect them as much as it is to protect the participants, okay? and they themselves keeping healthy boundaries and understanding that they have their own vulnerabilities. And again, I'm sure I've shouted her out again, but Kylie Taylor's book, The Ethics of Caring, she just does a spectacular job of addressing caregivers' vulnerabilities. And so I encourage all the listeners, please, if you're working in the field, understand that your own vulnerabilities are going to become heightened as much as the person taking the substance. There is, those of you who work in the field are going to understand what I'm talking about. You don't have to take the substance to kind of enter into the field. Back in the 70s, we used to call it a contact guy. That's an old term. I don't think people use it anymore. But, it actually happens. It's a real thing, okay, that we used to talk about and laugh about in the 70s, in which you would be in the presence of somebody who would be in an altered state, and something about your own state would become affected or influenced by that person being in that state. And so this is something that I don't see it anywhere being talked about, Are people understanding that the vulnerability increases on both sides, the sensibilities, the sensitivities to smell, all the senses, okay, are going to be heightened. Our unconscious biases are going to be, vibrating at a different level, let's put it that way. And then there comes suggestibility. So before we start talking about suggestibility in the non-ordinary state, do you have any comments, questions about that state of vulnerability that is achieved on both sides in working in non-ordinary states of consciousness?
I do. I'm curious about, it almost sounds like we're speaking upon the relationships to and fro for vulnerability. Like when you come into contact with somebody, how do you manage that relationship with them? Because your relationship with that person is different than your relationship with their vulnerability, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, everybody who gets into a romantic relationship and falls in love understands vulnerability. Okay, because the first way, the boundaries collapse and love, and the first thing that happens is we feel really dreadfully vulnerable, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, even if we're practiced romantics, is that such a thing? But even if we've been in love a time or two before, it still catches us unawares. And how deeply, we're revealing ourselves and how vulnerable that feels. So this gets heightened in the non-ordinary state of consciousness. And, as you say, what's the relationship? Well, if you have, let's use the example of a clinician who's working with maybe, a psychedelic, MDMA, look at all the ones that are now being licensed in certain areas, psilocybin or MDMA. Research projects and for post-traumatic stress disorder and ketamine, and there's various projects and clinical settings in which these non-ordinary states of consciousness are being achieved through the use of substances. And that's all fine and good, and the research is indicating that this is beneficial, and more research is the better. At the same time, is who's talking about those vulnerabilities on both sides? And how do we talk about that? Is that part of the preparation? For me, what seems to be a really important part is, the practitioner can't be, I don't know, this is like new territory, but I don't think the practitioner can be sitting there saying to the prospective person who's going to be in the non-ordinary state, I feel a little vulnerable when you're in that non-ordinary state. So here's the case for elders, mentoring, support groups, colleagues. That's really important in everyday life, but in non-ordinary states, it becomes even more important to have a community of senior team, elders, colleague. Stan Grof, when he was doing his work, he made sure that everyone on his team, that they had, like decompression sessions. Okay. And when I was training with him and then staffing with him and Jack Corfield in retreats, the team got together at the end of the day and we discussed issues that came up for us that we weren't sure if we handled them well. you know, and this wasn't just part of the training, this was part of the ongoing important dialogue that should be happening, is that we need to be, whether, you know, certainly the practitioners need to have that support system of colleagues, a team, to be able to explore, you know, what's coming up for me, and how I handled the situation, and you know, going forward. Those kind of conversations, I think, are essential. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't have the experience in altered states of consciousness in a practice with anybody. I mean, I have explored some interesting states, and I have journeyed together with people that I care about. I'm not I don't feel qualified to do it. On some level, it scares me to think that if I find myself in a position where I'm unsure of something and I try to help someone in another direction, you know, the same way if you and I are in a boat and we're going to a destination, but if you pick one course structure to the right, you could end up in a completely different destination. And I've
That's right.
I've been there on myself. I'm like, how did I get here? So I don't, you know, maybe you could share a story about being vulnerable and being in a position where it's uncharted territories.
Yeah, uncharted territory. Well, I got a few interesting stories. I'm not sure if they fit 100%, but they're the ones that pop up into mind. Okay, so here for me is an example of you know, vulnerability on the part of the more the participant. Okay, and you know, being who I am, and the certain trainings and life experiences, and being somewhat senior in the work that I do. Thank God I had enough sensibilities to be able to look at a situation and say, wow, okay, you know. So here I'll unfold it for you, the story.
Okay.
So here's the story. I had been in the early days of my participation and following the tradition of the Santo Daime. I and our growing center had been connected to a number of different churches. The original one in Montréal, and one of the main branches in the Santo Daime at the time, and another church that was in Rio de Janeiro, led by a very charismatic individual who had started traveling throughout United States and Canada. And I had some concerns, I had some serious concerns, as, you know, I was unfamiliar in the beginning with the culture, unfamiliar with the language. And so there's a lot of things that you miss. And that is the first vulnerability. Okay. The first vulnerability for the practitioner, for the person, the participant, is if you don't know the language and you don't know the culture. Okay. And so this is a big part of what has to be an important part of the conversation with people who are doing all of this traveling to South America to participate in a lot of different things, or Mexico, Central America. And so as I started to understand things and speak more to people, and I started to realize that there was some what I considered to be ethical challenges there, and I started to find ways to address them. And so I wrote a code of ethics based on Jack Kornfield's book. This is in the year 2000. And I think this book was published, was it 1999, maybe something like that. And so I was ecstatic, wrote up a code of ethics, you know, took it to this elder. He kind of started reading it, held it like this, and handed it back to me. He says, maybe your government needs this, but I don't. And I went, problem. Problem. Okay, so I thanked him, put it on one side. Okay. Shortly thereafter, he's traveling, and I'm invited to go down to, you know, to visit. I won't mention where in the United States, but it was supposed to be this big work. And I kind of heard tell that he was developing some new kind of mediumship ways of working. And so I've my mediumship opened decades ago. People, if you've read my books, I tell the story of how that started to open. And so I've had wonderful teachers. I've had the gift of working with great spiritual guides. And, you know, I'm still in my journey and consider myself to still be an apprentice even though I'm considered kind of a teacher, I'm really clear that this is something you keep learning until your last breath, and maybe you get it, next step into the next lifetime. And so he's kind of developing a new kind of mediumship, a kind of Santo Daime work. And I thought, okay, this would be interesting. So off I go, and the work opens, and he starts doing some things that I had never seen before in the Santo Daime, which I was sure wasn't actually at all part of the Santo Daime. And hauling people up to the front and cracking them open on the mediumship level. And I'm looking askance at this, thinking, what is this really about? So I go inside, I pray, I ask my guides. My guide said, my main guide says to me, stay in your place. Because I'm thinking, I'd like to get up and leave, but you don't leave. It's not it's part of, you don't. You wait till the end of the work, and if you have a thing, you deal with it, right? And so I'm sitting thinking, I'm not ever going to be in another thing like this. There's something really off here, okay? He's opening doors in the astral to dark realms. I mean, this is not the Santo Daime, okay? It is not the Santo Daime. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm in my place. I'm sitting actually at the altar because I'm considered senior in the North American scheme of things. So I'm sitting there and having this conversation with my guide saying, get me out of here. Please get me out of here. Just get me out of here. And so basically my guide says to me, stay in your place, stay firm, sing and pray, close all your doors. Don't let any of this affect you, and don't ever do this again. Okay. Don't ever do this again. You will not be in this man's presence again. You will not participate in this again. I'm going, right. cut my orders. Okay. Sat it out until the end of the work. And that was it. Because, I want to say a little bit about mediumship as I understand it, and what is not permitted in our church and which is not permitted usually in the main traditional Santo Daime churches. And I call them my print in the book. See, you don't find anybody, this oral tradition. So I've codified a lot of things. So in our church, this is the rules of the Salao. The Salao is the sanctuary. Okay, it's called the Salao. And this is the rules of the Salao on mediumship. Okay, number one, no examining and staring into people's space. Okay, now this is a really well-known one in the Santo Daime. You don't sit in a work and stare into people, okay? You don't stare. You close your eyes, you go inside, you're there to do your own personal work. Okay, so no staring into people's space. And no touching people without permission. This is very common in the Santo Daime. And with intentions other than what is needed for their safety and well-being or by their request. Common guidelines in the Santo Daime. So if people go into what we call the healing area and they need to lie down, if they ask, please hold my hand, or please, something, okay, then the guardian, called the guardian on duty, will do what they can to support. But we don't go touching people unless it's for their own safety or well-being. Looks like you're about to fall off your chair. Guess what? You're probably going to get touched, okay? Somebody's going to come and say, come lie down, okay? Or they're catching you as you're falling. We really ask people, if you feel a little dizzy, go lie down. Don't wait until you're falling off your chair, okay? So third thing, doing psychic readings. That is telling people anything about what is seen in their space. So in other words, no staring into people's face, no reading their aura, no reading their past lives, none of this stuff, okay? Such as, and here's the real key, is the people who feel that I see darkness, I see your past lives, I see you have a dark being, all of this. This is a thing that is happening. Okay, it's a thing that is happening. It may be part of some people's belief systems, and that's okay if it's part of your belief system. Okay, but don't bring that in places where people are vulnerable. It's here the suggestibility is incredibly sensitive. Okay, so no psychic readings. You're not allowed in our center, in our church. You're not allowed to go and say after work, oh, by the way, I see you have a dark being, and you have this, and you have that. Go somewhere else. Okay, claims of being a healer. This is also something that is happening. This is, you know, and in part, you know, what we're talking about now is the people who are self-acclaimed. You know, that recently I wrote a number of posts and about people, please don't call yourself a healer and the reasons why, and the challenges with people who are self-acclaimed. You know, kind of the main one being is that it's so easy to fall in those traps of kind of thought forms and narcissistic bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who are self-acclaimed often operating alone, they don't need any supervision, they don't need any training, they don't need anything, they've got it all, you know, God spoke to them. And that's a problem, because we all need colleagues and teamwork and support work to be able to help keep us steady on the path, because we're human, you know. So no psychic readings, no claims of being a healer or being a medium that can heal, remove, resolve things that they claim to see or read in someone's aura or psychic space. Now, this is vastly different, what's happening in our culture, from the true curandera healers, who are apprenticed and trained in their field the same way as a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, a dentist, an accountant would be, and who studied their whole life with certain gifts, where they are in their sacred Tahero, that people knowingly go to them and knowingly ask for them help. So this is a level of consent. I know that you're known as a curandera. I know that you work with certain tools. The same way going to the dentist. I know you're going to put something in my mouth. Okay? So there's a level of consent which is vastly different from what's happening here, where self-acclaimed healers or people in positions where they're working with vulnerabilities all of a sudden think that they have some kind of healing power or magical powers to do things to people. And unless you really have the apprenticeship and training to work with that level of mediumship, then that becomes a real danger to everybody's vulnerability. And the thing that I always remind people who are kind of doing that is, have you considered liability? Do you have insurance? That if you tell somebody that they're possessed or they have dark beings and they're really unhappy, or they have, you know, some kind of a psychological react to this and they're unhappy and they sue you, do you have insurance? And some people are taken by surprise because it's never occurred to them that liability could be an issue. And so this is a real vulnerability on the part of practitioners, is they need to sit down and look at what's my liability here and what I'm doing and how I'm conducting myself and the care that I'm giving and the substance that I'm serving to others. What is my level of personal liability? Or, you know, in the place of a clinic, has that been addressed? And is it a conversation? Do you have that thoughtful look on your face? Which usually means that you have a question. I'm rattling on here.
It's good. The question that I have in my mind is that there's a similarity between heightened states of awareness and intoxication. And intoxication seems to be something that power does, that certain intoxicants do, and they make us act in a way that is irresponsible. And that relationship to vulnerability. Maybe you could speak about the. I guess the question is the relationship to intoxicants. Like, it sounds like that's what it is in some level.
Well, you know, alcohol creates, or any intoxicant creates, a non-ordinary state of consciousness.
Right.
You know, they're all on the spectrum. Now, some, you're using the word intoxicant, that's fine. Certain lower our consciousness.
Right.
They lower our inhibitions. They lower our, you know, kind of self, you know, our ability to connect with inner wisdom and self-awareness seems to like really be dialed down with alcohol. And that's where it becomes a problem, because people's vulnerabilities, they can be taken advantage of, very much so. And when they're inebriated, and it's not vastly different. I mean, the state of consciousness in which a person who is drunk is in is vastly different from the state of consciousness somebody who is in a Santo Daime ritual, or somebody who's taken MDMA in a sanctioned, licensed setting, you know. So there you're going to have the setting and the training and the
Right.
appropriateness by which to guide the person versus getting drunk in a bar and God knows what happens to you. You know, you fall down and break a leg, or somebody drops something in your drink, and the next thing you know, you've got problems.
Right.
So, but they're all non-ordinary states of consciousness. You're absolutely correct. But some of those states, they all have a great degree of vulnerability, but
Right.
some of them have more consciousness and some of them have less consciousness.
It seems to me that it does. On a further, if I were to pull on that string a little bit more, it seems that your relationship to authority is the problem when you are not in, maybe if you don't have the lived experience, maybe that's the difference is your inability to or your ability, an individual's ability to confuse power and authority with someone that's vulnerable. That's what it seems to be like.
Excellent. Very good. Gold star. Okay. Because yes, power, authority, and vulnerability are all tied in together. Okay. Anybody who takes a position of authority automatically, and that's where codes of ethics come in, because the doctor, the dentist, the accountant, the lawyer, the therapist, okay, the Madrinha in the church, there's an authority there that gives you a power, and it has to be held ethically. And, all of these vulnerabilities that we have on both sides, the needs of the practitioner to be the healer, to be the one who's bringing about all of these wonderful reactions and healings. You have to take a good look at yourself, and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And who am I doing it for? And what are my vulnerabilities? And how am I managing those in the face of all of this? And those are questions for both sides. For the participant, why am I here? Why am I doing this? What are my intentions around it? Now, we have two other points in our rules of this law and mediumship, which is not diagnosing or interpreting people's spiritual experiences. It's so easy to do that. In my position, and I can point people in, try reading this book, try looking at that, try considering this, except for, very clear mediumship openings in which certain beings are now, certain things are happening that it's really obvious that, they need a certain direction in a certain way. And the other thing is, touching any personal objects, either on the altar or the side table, is people don't understand that these things are really, some people go into other people's houses and start touching everything, and it depends on whose house you're in. Don't touch. Depends on whose house you're in. Especially in these heightened states, we've had people who kind of become very like 2-year-old childlike, and they want to go run around the room and touch everything, and people and things and people's personal stuff, and so there's this necessity to have healthy boundaries around everything. And so, we look at vulnerabilities, and, we're going to talk a little bit more about suggestibility, how in the non-ordinary state of consciousness, when we are vulnerable, how suggestibility is heightened too. How whatever we are, which is why, let's just speak for the Santo Daime, there's no talking. Not allowed to talk in a work. No talking. It's one of the first silence. It's one of the first rules of the Salao, silence. And no talking unless it's absolutely necessary. And so if in what's called the chain of command, if there's a direction that needs to be given, it's as simple as possible. If the leader of the work has a few guidelines to give or a few teachings to offer, it's just that. There's no conversations. There's no talking. You don't go and sit with your buddy in the healing area and strike up a conversation. So there's no talking. Everything is in silence. Everything is, and this reduces the amount of personality engagement and invitation for projections and transference and countertransference that can happen so easily in the non-ordinary state. Did you need me to break that down a little bit more? Or did you
Yeah,
get it?
I think I got a little bit of it. Like, it's on some
Tell me
level,
what you understand, so then I can gauge what others might understand.
it seems to me in a suggestive state or in the heightened states of awareness, especially in a ceremonial container, that everything you do in there has the ability to help you redefine the reality in which you live. And so
Yes.
whether it's an object, a word, a stare, any sort of action can have
Yeah.
profound, like the pond into the rippled water, like it radiates outward and it can have incredible changes. Is that on
Yes.
par?
Yes. Yes. You've got it. And so this is why great care is given to what we wear and how the salah is set and what images are in the room, what is said, the hymns we sing, the prayers we say, the teachings that are offered, that everything is done really carefully, because we all understand that everybody's in this heightened state, and the suggestibility is really high. And so that's where anybody working in the field should have a deep understanding about that, about suggestibility. And again, here's the, people who are being trained to work in psychedelics and entheogens, where, I'm hoping that's an important part of their training and their education, and that kind of a colleague support group is an important part of how they're doing the work, and the kind of feedback that's so helpful and supportive to everyone. And the you don't feel anywhere as vulnerable if you know at the end of, let's say, supervising a session in MDMA or psilocybin, that you have, a team of people that, whether it's once a week or whatever it is, you have a team of people that you're going to be, discussing challenges that arose or vulnerabilities that arose on your own part. And and again, this becomes the problem in the alternative hybrid use, is that if there's a lack of understanding or knowledge about these things, then the likelihood of them happening becomes greater. And how do we honor each person's role and respect each person's role in a way that's healthy for everybody? That's the challenge. How to be for the higher good for all.
It seems to me that there has to be an understanding of one is both teacher and student. When you break up into groups like that, at one time, maybe that comes from playing different roles, but it sure can be confusing trying to switch all those roles. And I'm this person, or I'm that person, or I'm both people. It's that to me sounds like it would be a part that is very difficult to get used to, especially when you have authority or when you are in a position where something you could, especially when working with someone who could be on the edge of a breakthrough or a breakdown.
Yes. and knowing how to create the space to understand that and support it.
Yeah.
To know that, Stan Grof has some wonderful expressions. He said, breathe until you're surprised. And that was wonderful, because it let go of expectations and intentions and goal setting and all that jazz. And for the facilitators, what it meant was, you're going to be surprised too. So stay alert, stay alert, because the facilitators, people working in the breathwork setting, you're going to be surprised too at what may be awoken, and how to manage it, and how to support it in a way. We were talking about suggestibility,
Yeah.
right, and vulnerability, and you asked me to tell you some stories. I told you one. You want another one?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So this one's kind of a little tricky. It happened during the time, the very early days. I had a number of different kind of psychosynthesis trainers when I was going through as is very normal in psychosynthesis, And so, however, you also have individual supervision as well as group supervision, as there's layers of this in the transpersonal work. And so I remember things coming up for me that I didn't understand. And so I'd spoken to one of the supervisors, and here the power of suggestibility and the need for really healthy boundaries. Now, the timing and the era was really important. It was at a time where, I don't know if you remember this or you're aware of it, but kind of through the late 80s, there was a bunch of things that was happening. Let's say through the 80s, there was a bunch of things happening. There was, first of all, everybody was getting UFO'd, right? What happened to that?
What was the term you used? WIFO'd?
UFO'd?
Yeah. Oh, UFO'd. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
I remember there was about a decade. I don't remember it it's been a while since I've kind of thought about this, that everybody was getting UFO'd. I mean, everybody, you had neighbors that were UFO'd, and they all had these stories about what happened up in the spaceship and, and all of this jazz. And I mean, it was really, serious researchers looked at it like, what's going on? I remember having a conversation with Stan Grof about it. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, who was he looked at this whole field. He happened to be in our group when we first went to MAPI in 1996. So it was still around in the early 90s. Okay. And he did a whole bunch of research, like what the heck's going on was his position. And he actually had a meeting in at the Pentagon and in the White House with what his findings, what he thought he would. Unfortunately, he got killed in a traffic accident. Huge loss to the field. Only a few years after that, in London, in England, didn't look, stepped out, got hit by a bus. What a tragic ending to a wonderful, wonderful man. Anyway, so here's this whole thing going on about UFOs, okay? And then it kind of melts out and disappears, okay? And then we have this whole thing about false memory syndrome. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Do you actually hear about it these days?
Only from Jules.
Good point, okay? And he's addressing the need for ethics and healthy boundaries and suggestibility. He's one of the standout people who is doing that. So, chapeau to Jules. And Jules Evans, if anyone doesn't know, who we're ecstatic integration. Don't know who we're talking about. And so, we have this thing that was happening, and it actually tried to happen to me. So here I am. I have stuff that I'm not sure. I don't have an idea, but I can feel something's bubbling up to the surface. And it feels young, it feels kind of vulnerable. Only later do I understand that it's body memory of birth, okay? And I was just starting to jump into Stan Grof's work when I was in my psychosynthesis training. So I made an appointment with one of the supervisors. And so I sat and spoke with her, and I said, and she immediately says, you must have been incested. And I said to her, no, I don't think that was possible. I know my father, and my mom certainly had some quirks, but nothing like that. Right. And I know in my body that didn't happen to me. I was appalled that was said to me. And then there was, after I kind of said, no, I don't think so, there was like digging around. Well, there must have been someone in your early life who, because all of a sudden, this whole thing was happening around, 8 out of 10 women or something have been incested. And I mean, it's appalling. I don't want anybody to think that I am denying at all the terror, the trauma, the horror of these situations. I am not at all. They happen. It's real. It creates a terrible effect within the family and on the children. So please don't anybody. I'm just saying, it didn't happen to me. And the suggestion that it had happened to me based on some blurry kind of, blurry sensations, memories that were coming up for me, was not at all helpful for me. And if I hadn't have had such a strong, clear sense of self and what felt right for me and what didn't feel right for me, then can you imagine if I'd gone with that? You know?
Yeah, I think it's been happening in the world of psychiatry for a long time. You know, people have been wearing their mask of trauma like a badge of honor and become that thing, right?
Oh, okay. So
How's that for a transition?
we're heading in a different direction. And this is all to do with suggestibility.
Right.
Okay. Is when we're in a vulnerable state. And I would take that, that I was in that moment vulnerable, speaking
Right.
again of that particular incident. In both of them, the two that I've shared in this session, both of them were vulnerable. I had drunk Daime. I was sitting in a work rather than silence, and the regular Santo Daime way of being, and certainly mediumship is an important part in the Orthodox lines, as well as the what's known kind of more Umbanda Santo Daime lines, but nothing like this. Okay, nothing like what was happening here. And so, for me, both of these were extremely vulnerable moments. Okay, in which I am intensely grateful for my relationships with my guides, trusting my inner wisdom to immediately align with my spiritual guides, not letting things make me go all blurry. And so this is a really important part to put in, is what's our responsibilities in those moments as participants. And that moment sitting with that supervisor, where for one shocked moment, I thought, could that have happened to me? Do you know what I'm saying? And then I kind of, it's just like, it was so clear for me that it was a no, and feels like it's really something else. But that vibrated, as you said earlier about throwing the pebble in the pond.
Yeah.
That created a vibration for me that, fortunately, at that point in my life, I had enough, as I said, sense of self, and had done enough personal and spiritual work that I could lean into that authenticity within me. But what about the people who haven't developed that yet? Who are put in the position where they're being told all kinds of things about themselves, and all kinds of things about what they should or shouldn't be doing about it, and all kinds of things about what somebody's going to do for them about it. And so this kind of level of suggestibility is something that just has to be discussed. And, and people who are working in the field need to firm up. Okay, am I working with a code of ethics? Am I working with colleagues? Am I making sure that I'm being authentic and also impeccable in the work that I'm doing? And for participants, okay, before we get to the trauma piece, okay, we'll get there in a second. I'm just going to read, it's from one of my books. Please. It's volume 1. For those of you who don't know my books, Ayahuasca Awakening, volume 1 and 2. It's a guide to self-discovery and self-mastery and self-care. And so I talk about all the stages of spiritual development, and in choosing a teacher, spiritual group, or organization, the following guidelines. So for those of you interested, it's right here in the books. Okay, trust your own intuition. Listen to your own wisdom and intuition and your instincts. Okay? If it feels like there's something off, then you know what? Take a long, slow, deep breath, and before you make a commitment, just have a look at that. Discuss it with somebody who you respect. Sound it out to someone you respect and say, hey, I went to this yoga class. I went to this retreat. I went to this therapist, and this thing happened, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Okay? Discuss it with somebody who you respect. Hopefully somebody who has either the training or the job experience or something to be able to say, yeah, that feels a little off too. Okay? Get references from friends or people that you respect. So if you're looking at whether you're going to go see a therapist or join a spiritual group, get some references. Inform yourself about the person, the organization, the path, the religion, the principles, okay, as well as the person or group responsible. Very recently, I was reviewing a group's website that was offering, let's call them sessions and events, okay? And I was looking, and nowhere on the website is a set of their principles or their beliefs. Nowhere on the website was a code of ethics, how they conduct themselves. Nowhere was there anything. There was just tons of pictures of them looking all kind of spiritual and, hugging each other and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, where's the principles? What are you're going to be serving people stuff? What is it you actually believe? Where's your set of beliefs and principles? And where's your code of ethics? And, you go on our church website and it's all right there. Principles, tenets of the faith, code of ethics, okay? Everything is right there. Rules of the Slough. Everything is right there for people to read. You're going to be coming into our Slough, then you need to know this is what we believe. This is what we're going to be singing and praying about. And if you don't like it, then we're not for you. God bless.
Yeah.
So inform yourself. Inform yourself. This responsibility lies with the participant. Each of us is responsible to inform ourselves. Check if the person or the organization has a code of ethics. Okay. Do they practice sincerity and respect towards staff and students? Big clue. Okay. Really big clue. There's an old saying that, you can, if you start dating someone, watch how they treat their dog. And the waitress or waiter in the restaurant, watch how they treat them, and how they treat them is going to be a good indicator of what you need to know about the person, right? So if money is involved, donations or fees or something, does the teacher organization practice accountability and transparency? In other words, do you know what people are paying? Do you know what the donations are? And do you know where the money goes? Is it a volunteer organization? Are there any paid positions? Where does the money go? These are important questions to ask if you're going to be making a donation or paying a fee. When you make an appointment with your dentist, you assume you're paying for dental work, all right? You get your bill, you've had your teeth cleaning, you've had your whatever, okay, out you go. You're filing your income tax, you pay your accountant. You know what you're getting. Why is it that people go into spiritual organizations or they go into these settings where they're going to be in a non-ordinary state of consciousness and they don't ask the same questions? I don't know. It's like something happens, some vulnerability or something happens, and people's regular sense of accountability for their own well-being seems to drop by the wayside. Does the teacher organization support students and clients in difficult situations such as spiritual emergency? And if so, what resources do they offer? So you get in deep waters, as you just mentioned the work Jules Evans is doing, the research that he's bringing forth in the articles and trying to address. A lot of these people were felt unintegrated, had difficult experiences. What kind of, and this can happen in everyday life. You don't have to go and take a substance to have a spiritual emergency or to have some kind of crisis in your personal life. This can happen spontaneously or as a result of a divorce or a new job or giving birth or your dog dying, or there's all kinds of things that can set this off. So the role of human guides is to help, to teach, and to be role models, not to direct your life or make your decisions for you. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's imperative.
Yeah, offer to help, to teach, offer teachings, and to be a role model. Okay. Okay, my final word of advice is do not be gullible. Okay, now this is, for some, this is a lifetime lesson, okay? All of us can, who was it who said, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Yep.
Did I get it right? Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, okay, so we all have to take responsibility, all of us, for our own suggestibility and our own gullibility, So never give up your personal power to anyone else. You are the master of your own life. Agree?
Yeah. Which is difficult for someone who's in transition or who is very vulnerable. They're looking for that direction.
That's right. And a good guide or teacher will keep reminding them the direction is inside of you. The source is inside of you. The wisdom is inside of you. All we're doing is creating a space for that authenticity and wisdom to grow. No teacher or guide or facilitator should take responsibility or ownership of somebody else's growth, healing, transformational process. The same way a good midwife does not take responsibility for their baby. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, I just helped baby arrive. You know, I didn't create baby. I just helped baby arrive. Okay. Yes, you can thank me, and that's great. Just doing my job. Okay. And that's the level that people working in the field of entheogens and psychedelics need to have. I didn't produce the baby. I just helped the baby arrive and help the mother give birth to the baby. And so if we have that kind of, authenticity and healthy boundaries, then we're going to be supporting people. If we start taking the power into ourselves, okay, I'm such a great healer and I'm such a this and I did that. And wow, and okay, that's a big problem.
I heard a good quote that I think sums up a lot of things for me, that helps me see clearly, almost like a lens to look through. And it's that when the instrument becomes institutionalized, it loses its ability to work. And if you look at healing as an instrument, of a self instrument, like you had mentioned before, the healing is in all of us. But when people decide that they institutionalize healing, like all of a sudden the healing no longer works in the way at which it should, because the healing happens inside of you, right? Like no one does the healing for you. And that maybe that speaks to the idea of the mentor or the leadership position, when they're asking you questions instead of giving you advice. Like in the Zen movement, they give you these koans where you can think about things versus telling you what your problem is.
And that's a delicate dance. Okay?
Yeah.
It's a delicate dance because again, the accountant has to say to you, your expenses are too high. Okay. And your dentist has to say, are you flossing regularly? Okay. And so on some level, there's a delicate dance in the area of psychology, personal growth, that whole spectrum of that includes personal transformation, personal growth, self-exploration, and the various and sundry different professions that have been serving that through a long period of time. Now I'm hearing some of your questions, and I'm thinking, like, these are really great questions. Are people thinking about them? Are people considering them? Are people looking at really taking ownership of their own personal transformation, or are they tossing it on to? Lots of people just want to go to the shaman and have the shaman remove that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that different from people who just go simply to a psychiatrist and say, give me a pill to make this go away? Now, I am not at all criticizing the place of pharmaceuticals in the role of health. Hey, grateful for anesthetic when I'm doing this. Okay? And I have dodgy hips with arthritis and bursitis, so if I scooch around when we're talking, that's what's happening for me. I love my cortisone shots. Okay. Well, the bursitis, all the arthritis, everything cools down for a few months. So please, no one here that I am, really saying the entire pharmaceutical. Now, like any industry, the pharmaceutical industry, with all of the psychiatric medications and, that are used in psychology and psychiatry. Okay, and general practitioners are prescribing them at the same time. So all the anti-anxieties and the antidepressants and things like that. I'm not speaking about them. I think that they have their place. They can be really helpful for helping a person, who's been through a very difficult or challenging experience. They can help them sleep. They can help them come to terms with their grief or their loss or their difficulties. Okay. but it's not, should never be the only solution, okay, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It can be a very important part of addressing and resolving. And definitely there are some conditions where medication is essential. Okay, and that's just a reality where, you know, there's a spectrum of well-being, and there's a full spectrum of it, a continuum of it. And there are definitely some people who really do require medication for their psychological or psychiatric, you know, stability. And then there's other people who can just use it for a short period of time as part of a program that it would include nutrition and exercise and support and perhaps in-depth exploration, to be able to come to terms with whatever it is that they're dealing with in their life, you know. And does this make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that I'm hopeful that people get a change of perspective, because I think for me, and I can only speak to me, however, it seems to me that the pain never goes away. And if you can understand that, then you know that you can't go to someone to take your pain away. And you shouldn't want to, because pain is growth. But it's difficult to have that perspective of like, this is with me forever. It's part of me. And maybe it's not such a bad thing. But when you try to eradicate a part of yourself that's trying to help you grow, that's when you invite the trauma. And when you look for the shortcut, you're inviting the person into your life, or the energy into your life, that's going to cause more pain, because you're not facing the issue. And so I think that when people go to someone and want to have a magic pill, or they want to meet a certain guru that's going to fix all their problems, they're inviting that problem right into their life. They may not be aware of it, but I think it's a perspective change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like that movie, The Matrix, you know, where there's a guy who kind of betrays everybody, and then he goes and he talks
Wants to go back, yeah.
And plug me back in, but this time I would like, you know, I'd like this fake life instead of that fake life, okay? And so there are people who, from despair, desperation, a whole host of experiences, say, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. Just give me the pill. Just give me the pill. Or who, in despair, go and seek all kinds of. I've watched former clients and participants in various workshops and classes I've taught and everything like that get to that place of despair, and instead of facing the situation, you know, I'm a cancer survivor, so I can actually speak to this from been there, done that, okay? And so we can panic away from the cancer, or we can sit down and go, wow, this is really scary.
Yeah.
Okay, this is terrifying. Okay, I remember I was going through my psychosynthesis training when I had my diagnosis of cancer, and I remember curling up on a mat and hope, you know, the rest of the class huddling around me, and then you know, one of them saying to me, "Hey, find yourself." Okay, find yourself. You know, because that first shock of, oh my God, you have to let all the fear and the grief, and unfortunately I was willing to do that, that in the midst of it, you have to reach down and find yourself. And yeah, I've watched lots of people panic, and they run to all kinds of places for all kinds of solutions and every kind of possible, you know, story about panicking away from. Now, I'm not talking about the people who, you know, like how I chose to, you know, relate to the health situation unchallenged, which was to go deep inside of myself, deepen my practice, examine my life, see what I needed to do to, if anything, to put things back into place, you know, or to put into place. I had children, teenage children, a mortgage on my house, which it is insured, of course, but still, you know, making sure everything is in place, and then opening and saying, okay, is this my time? Is this my time? And if this is my time, then, you know, I'm trusting spirit. Show me what it is that I can do or need to do. And if it's not my time, then help me go through this experience with as much courage as I possibly can find, and making good decisions for my well-being and the well-being of my family, you know? And please don't anybody think it was an easy time, because it certainly wasn't an easy time. And I'm immensely grateful to my family, my dear friends who were supportive, and especially my therapists. Okay, I was passing Kleenex. So, there's what do we do? Do we run away from it and try and find a way, like, plug me into another life? This isn't happening. Um, and or do we come to terms with and open up and own what's authentically going on inside and be with it? You said an interesting thing, George, which is the pain is always there. Now, I've had teachers teach me different things about this, and I'm going to try and speak from, I've had cancer. I've now lost both my parents. My mom died in October. My dad died 27 years ago. I've lost beloved cats. How many beloved friends have passed away? So it's not possible to have a life that doesn't have, what did Buddha say, illness or suffering. It's not possible to go through life without loss. It's not possible. So all of us have to come to terms with who am I in the face? Who am I in the face of loss, grieving, challenges, difficulties? Who am I? Because in the end, I think that's the last thing that we can choose. I can't change what's happening, but I can choose how I go through it.
Yeah.
Again, in volume 1 of my books, I'm quite sure it's volume 1, I talk about decisions. If it's not there, it's in volume 2, sorry. I talk about decisions and choices, and that and sometimes the final choice that we have is what state of consciousness we're going to have as we're going through an experience that's difficult for us. What state of consciousness am I going to have? Am I going to be all frightened, closed down, and swimming through it? Well, yeah, if you need to do that for a while, then you go ahead and do that for a while. Make sure you get the good support you need to do that for a while, But at some point, that needs to run down. That needs to, at some point, you start to feel, okay, I'm kind of, the well of whatever it is, grief, loss, fear, whatever, is starting to empty out now. It's starting to, and what is happening is not that the pain goes away, and not that the pain is always there. It's that we grow around it. So it's not so much that the pain or the loss or the trauma or what have you is so much shrinking, although it may be, but what's happening is we are growing around it. And what I would say that to, all my clients through all the decades. I worked with people nearly 4 decades. And the other thing I would say is, yes, you have a wound. Yeah, you have a wound. That was wounding, whatever the thing was. Okay, that was wounding. But you don't need to keep it a big gaping open wound. When we have a cut, we don't just leave it all open and bleeding. We make sure it's clean. We make sure it's protected. We put the right ointments on it to make sure. If we have to take antibiotics, we have a freshen our tetanus shot, whatever it is we have to do, we take responsibility for that physical wound, and we do what we can to heal it and make sure that the body gets what it needs. And now with the soul wounds, we get what the soul needs. What does the soul need to heal wounds? Because what I tell people is, it won't be a big gaping open wound that you just kind of cover up and ignore or deny. What it will be a scar. There will always be a scar.
Yeah.
But it'll be a scar. It won't be a great big bleeding wound, And so, we all have our scars, and we can look at our scars as our red badge of courage. And my scars from my surgery, from my cancer, or the one on my leg, it's like really obvious, And some people will ask me about it. And, it's like, did you get a shark bite? Or, some people are convinced that's from a motorcycle bite. And it's like, no, it's cancer. And so, owning your scars, not being ashamed of them, they're your courage. My daughter lived and studied in South Africa for a while. And she was doing her doctorate there at the University of Cape Town, and I went and spent a month with her to explore and travel, and it was a blissful, wonderful month. Anyway, she picked up wisdom, and I'm sure it was her who shared this with me, you know. And if not, then I've read it, and certainly I believe that Clarissa Pinkola Estes, her wonderful book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, I think she just addresses this, is that letting our scars become our badge of courage, where we can say, well, this is where I fought the lion and I won, you know? And that really totally went into my heart. So, and this is African and indigenous truth and wisdom. You don't hide your scars and get embarrassed of them and run for, you know, cosmetic surgery on absolutely everything, which is our culture. Okay, and I'm not against cosmetic surgery. I am not. Okay, for people who feel that it's an important part of their own authenticity, then, you know, that's your choice. It's your body. You get to do what you want. I'm just saying that some of us have scars that we can choose to say, hey, that's my red badge of courage. That's where I fought cancer and I won. You know, hey, I won. So it's all about how we deal with, we're really moving around vulnerability, whether it's about our body and whether it's about our soul and whether it's about where we're positioned in life. And we're also kind of edging around that word trauma, right?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm going to put it into a bit of a continuum now. So there was this whole thing with UFOs that kind of came and disappeared and kind of just melted and eased off. And I don't know, we don't see anything about it anymore. And then there was this false memory syndrome, which was like a huge issue. And, you know, a little bit of it has come back because people, you know, like Jules Evans are starting to talk about, hey, be careful that it was suggestibility, that you're not planting it a false memory, okay? That you're not doing that. And so if, you know, the instinct is to try and help and fix other people, we need to be careful that we're actually not making more problems than already existed. So, so here we have trauma. There's a lot of conversation about trauma these days. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Please don't anybody hear I'm saying a bad thing. It's not. Because what's been in the closet has to come out of the closet. You know? It just has to. It has to come out of the closet and walk around for a while. Okay, but we don't have to set it up on a pedestal. I have a father who was an officer in the British Army, and he fought through World War II. And I'm sure he had some post-traumatic stress disorder, but you just never talk about it. I mean, he was British. It was 1940s. You know, they knew from World War I about what they called shell shock. Okay, and then it became, I forget, there was another term they used for a while until it became post-traumatic stress disorder. It's real. It's absolutely real, and nobody is going to deny that the human experience is a spectrum that can include everything from the most wonderful and glorious of experiences that is fun and full of life and the best of being human and being alive, okay? Down to the most difficult and tragic. And you know, all we have to do is look at the news and see. I mean, right now there's 32 different wars around the world. 30, I think it's 32. Maybe it's up to 34. Who knows? Okay, and the war of the moment is the one that's on the evening news, and it'll shadow out the other wars. Okay, but what is this human experience that we can't live in peace? Well, it seems like we can't. And that's a reality, is we can't live in peace. And we need to take ownership that a large percentage of the human population is going to choose to, well, they're going to make other decisions. Now, how do we deal with what happens when people choose to not live with respect and peaceful and authenticity? And we're going to have, let's call it trauma. Okay, so it's always been there. You can read any ancient texts you want. Jesus talked about it. There'll always be war. There'll always be poverty. There'll always be illness. Buddha talked about it. No one escapes illness or suffering. We all age, we all die. Life is difficult. Okay, so all the great spiritual teachers talk about it. Yes. Now, how do we, as I said, bring it out of the closet with us, putting it on a pedestal? Because there's something that seems to be happening. And if you can bear with me, there's an article, maybe based on a book by Lexi Pandel and Fox, talking about how trauma became the word of the decade.
Mm.
Okay, and like, if I can just read one or two.
Yeah, please.
From this. So this person is saying trauma is real. It can result in real disorders. We all agree. As I said, having a dad who was part of the troops, releasing Ruger Belson, one of the death camps, okay, who was stationed in Germany for part of the war, who saw things, before the war. He was just stationed outside of the Quetta earthquake. So it happened 30 kilometers away. He watched the whole city go to rubble. He was a major in the British Army. He took, his troops that were immediately there. I think he was captain at that point. He took them in as soon as the dust was starting to settle. And I'll never forget what he said. Where do you start? Where do you start? Where do you start with something so enormous? And so we're seeing this on the news, more or less, every night. And so we know it's real. No one's going to be denying this. However, there's something that's happening. He talks about the DSM-5, the Standard American Psychiatric Diagnosis, which is not my Bible, but it's an important part of the conversation, right?
Right.
Currently defines it as an actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence, either being the victim or the witness. So that's the actual definition. So what's happening is the definition of trauma is changing. What my father experienced in the war was traumatic. He watched people dying. He assisted in opening, death camp, concentration camp. He lived these experiences, and so nobody's going to deny that it's real. He came home whole in body, which was kind of a miracle. So, given how many people lost their lives and lost, part of their functionality. So getting back to this, growing attention to the term has pushed forth a larger acknowledgement of the indirect and long-lasting consequences of violence. And what the author is saying is this is long overdue. It's like this had to come out of the closet. It has to have its time of walking around. But we can't pretend it's like this is the only trauma that happened. We have to see that trauma is something that's part of the human experience, and that there aren't just a few people who suffered a particular trauma, but the trauma is part of the story of the human race. And then how do we come to acknowledge this, and how do we support it and understand it with, again, I'm going to keep using that term without putting it on a pedestal. So some who study trauma, however, say that current cultural references to the word have become a mess. Okay. I'm quoting. This is not me saying this. So it's tongue-in-cheek, casual mentions mixed up with serious confessions and interrogations of the past, with definition misunderstandings, from the absurd to the trivial, the profound, and the sincere. So I'm saying, what courage this person has to step up and saying, hey, wait a minute. This isn't a one-size-fits-all word. Why has it become a one-size-fits-all word? We can't, the trauma of say, being bullied at school, which so many people, come on, did anybody actually go through school without being either the bullied or the bystander? Is there anybody? If somebody is, please write to me on LinkedIn, okay? Because you're either the bully, the bullied, or the bystander in school. When are we going to take ownership of the fact that the human race is actually an aggressive race, and that children by nature can be unkind? I was a child in school. I had children in school. I have grandchildren in school. And when they're describing behavior that I saw in school and that my children saw in school and experienced in school, and they're witnessing the exact same behavior. So all of these things that we do doesn't seem to actually address that, does it? Or do we just have to have a whole different conversation about this and an understanding about this and find a way to kind of manage it in a different way or put it into a different thing? Because just trying to say that everybody is traumatized, okay, and then, okay, where do we go from there? You know, like, I don't want my identity to be, you know, I will say I'm a cancer survivor, but that's not my identity. That's an experience that I had, that I got a tremendous amount of wonderful support in, that I'm very grateful that, yes, I survived. Thank you very much. It wasn't my time. Okay. But it's not my identity. You know, it's something that happened to me that was really scary. And I'm really glad that it's going to happen again, and fingers crossed. Okay.
Yeah.
But you know, am I making sense about trauma becoming an identity instead of an experience? Is this making some sense? Because I'm finding my way in this conversation. I actually haven't had this conversation in a public forum yet. So, you know, any listeners, please be patient with me. And thank you, George, for your patience, because this is a finding my way with the conversation and just wanting to air it out and see, you know, where it goes. A couple more quotes from this. Trauma is one of those words that can mean anything, says Michael Shearing, a medical doctor, professor at Tulane University, author of the book, The Trouble with Trauma. It can mean I was stuck in traffic, that was traumatic. My football team lost, that was traumatic. That's the way it's now used in our culture. This is a quote of his from his book, The Trouble with Trauma. The word hasn't simply been watered down, but adopted widely as a kind of cultural touchstone. I have trauma as a statement is now in the same category as I'm depressed or I'm addicted to cookies, says Pamela Rutledge, a media psychologist. It has become a popular idiom tossed around with diminished meaning. So what do you have to say about all that? I found this fascinating when I did a little dig into it, based on a question I got asked in another lecture, which in the moment, because it was part of a bunch of questions, I decided to dodge until I'd done a little bit more research, you know?
Let me take a different tact on it. Maybe it's a sign of progress. You know, maybe the fact that everybody is saying I have trauma and people are agreeing with it and people are on some levels, maybe we've gotten away from my trauma is bigger than your trauma, which, you know, is
great. Something. Okay. This hierarchy of trauma. Okay.
Yeah.
I that's one of the things I'm having trouble with is, you know, that takes me right back to no one escapes illness or suffering.
Right.
And the beautiful Zen story of the woman who, you know, was sent by the Zen master to find the grain of rice, and she has to find it in a village where there's been no loss or suffering. Okay, and she comes back a year later and says, I'm healed because in the sharing of my story, no one has escaped illness or suffering. So if this current conversation about trauma takes us to a place of sharing, of compassion, of support, hey, I'm right in there with it. If, however, it starts to separate us into a hierarchy, my trauma is more important than your trauma, I have a problem with that. Okay? I don't know if anybody else does. You do?
But they aren't there some traumas that are more prolific or more painful than other traumas? Like, how can you not put it in a hierarchy?
That's where do we go? That's where this is exactly what those people are saying, is the word has become a touchstone for a lot of things that it was never intended to mean. Trauma is like ER trauma. You know, the person's gone into cardiac arrest. That's trauma. Technically, by medical standards, trauma is trauma. However, the word is now being an umbrella term. So I'm suggesting that maybe we either redefine the word or we start using different words. Okay. And instead of just using this word for everything, because then we are going to fall into the hierarchy, which is, the people who's, let's just use the war that's on the news right now.
Right.
Okay, the people who've had bombs drop and their entire town is now obliterated, and they can't find, they're a 12-year-old who can't find their father, mother, or younger siblings. Okay, because everything is a huge pile of rubble, and the odds of them being able to be found alive is very slim. That's a completely different kind of trauma from when I was in grade 4, somebody wasn't very nice to me. I'm sorry, it just is. I have difficulty. I'm not saying that the circumstances, the difficult or challenging circumstances that we have in our life they're ours, and a broken finger that I have isn't in comparison to your broken leg. Okay, my broken finger hurts me, your broken leg hurts you. But how do we get out of that dynamic that seems to be happening now, where things that are truly traumatic are being kind of diminished by the casual cultural use of the word? I just feel like this is a conversation that needs to be hit, for my own understanding, because I find myself getting curious about this, and how do we speak about it, and how do we remember, I've been, nearly 4 decades in private practice. I'm used to holding space, and coming around to 28 years in the Santo Daime, I'm used to holding supportive space. I have no problem with that. And encourage it, and that people should find supportive space and co-create supportive space, and the people's stories need to be told, and they need to be heard, and we need to respect people's stories. But how do we now deal with this cultural language thing in a way that is respectful to the people, everybody's experience, but not lumping what I would consider to be kind of real trauma? We're back to the hierarchy again. Sorry.
No, it's. Can you
Help
think of a
me out
different?
here, George. Help me out.
Okay, well, as someone who has been in practice for that long, and you've seen the evolution of the definition of trauma, like you've seen it, you've seen the texture of trauma change. So, if past relevant behavior is the best predictor of future behavior, what does it look like moving forward? If you look on all your experience, how has trauma changed? And is there an answer in there? Is there a morphology in there that you've seen that you can see a pattern with?
Well, I think that this is part of it. And again, I'm just finding my way in the conversation.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a part of it that maybe people are talking about and maybe people aren't. But I'm going to come back to that if we have this experience in our culture that I have a right to happiness, we've talked about this before, that I'm entitled, it's this entitled, I'm entitled to have certain things, that spiritually goes against everything that I understand about the human experience. That none of us are we all get what we get. We make the decisions we make, and a lot of the times the difficulties we have are based on our own decisions. Mm-hmm. Sorry, but that's what I've seen. I'm 74 now, and I've seen a lot and lived some. And it looks like a lot of the time that we have problems is because of decisions that we made, or things that we denied, or things we overlooked. And if we just take responsibility for that, for our part in it, then that really helps us to grow. Now, the stuff that happens that we had no say in decision in, that can be, we're innocently walking along the street and something, a flower pot flies off somebody's balcony and conks us out, and, or walking across the street and, I got hit on, I was riding my bicycle going through the intersection on a green light, a taxi jumped his red light and ran into me. I had to do 2 years of physiotherapy. They couldn't believe nothing was broken. And my helmet, thank God, kept my head safe. But, I didn't ask for that. So this was just stuff that happened. Those poor people where the bombs are dropping. They didn't ask for that. War is terrible. And most of us wish it would end and stop and never happen again, but that's not realistic. And so trauma is always going to be part of the human experience, is what I'm trying to say. How do we create a conversation in which people are able to come forward, but recognize it as being part of the human experience, that it's not a personal identity, that it's, this is making sense, that it's part of the human experience, that if we, to do our best authentic self in it and be that if we embrace it as an experience in which we are going to have our own reactions and that we need some support, but it's not who we are. And if we need to become it for a short period of time, then that's part of the growth of it, but it's not the end goal. And so all the people who came out of the closet needed to come out of the closet. The people who'd suffered at the hand, like the whole Me Too thing, and all of the different movements that have come out and said, hey, we need to talk about this. Yes, we do. And it all needs to come out of the closet. It needs to have its turn, walking around, being identified. My concern is, let's not put it up on the pedestal and let these things not become a personal identification. But I'm a person who had this experience. I'm taking what I can to grow and to develop with it. I'm making sure I get what I need to help me to get supported and recover from it, and to make wise decisions based on who I really am and not what that experience tried to show me about who I am. Does that make some sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it's kind of scary though. Like on some level, maybe, if we look at systems, and like Darwinism, like maybe the strong people eat the suffering people. Like I don't want that to happen, but on some level, if people are going to be pushed into trauma and they can't get out of it, those people end up becoming the food for the caterpillar, the catalyst for the butterfly, if that makes sense. Like maybe that's where we are as a species. Maybe we are in the cocoon.
I'm not following the whole thing of the caterpillar and the butterfly. You lost me back at. Okay. So if we accept that the human species is aggressive,
yes,
can we do that?
Yes, of course.
Species is aggressive, and that we have to understand and our own instincts and survival instincts and our own nature, the nature of the human species. And
I don't think aggressive is a strong enough word. Can we change that?
Violent? Yeah, we're violent.
Yes. Okay.
We're a violent species.
Yes, I like that.
We are aggressive, violent, greedy, selfish.
Yes, all of it.
All of it. And we have to own that. Otherwise, it runs us. If we repress it and pretend we don't have it, it goes into our shadow, and then it makes our unconscious decisions for us. If we recognize that that's part of being human, but we don't want it to make our decisions for us, and that we want our higher self, our inner wisdom, to make those decisions for us, what's for the higher good and the betterment. Okay, our petty self is always want to go in the other direction.
Yeah.
Okay. But our higher self is going to try and call us into what's for the higher good. Okay. So if we're looking at that, run it again by me what you were trying to say about the caterpillar and the butterfly.
So I think that people, I don't see a middle ground. And maybe this is my personality, but I'm trying to find a middle ground. But it seems to me that when you take a good look at the way in which people are greedy, they're violent, they're selfish, they fight for resources, it's very difficult to beat back that group of people with a group of people that are victims. And it seems like the people in the middle are a very small group trying to be that bridge. But I don't know if that bridge can hold. I think at some point in time, you split into one of those two groups. And that can lead to more trauma, because you don't want to be the greedy, selfish person. But on some level, you're like, okay, well, I can't be the victim. I have to do this. And so there's this dichotomy that happens. So what I'm
hearing you say is that you're looking at the victim and perpetrator.
Yeah.
And that in between, on a global scale, not just
Right.
in an individual situation,
Right.
but that on a global scale, that there's victims and perpetrators.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I address this dynamic in my book, and I call it predator and prey.
Mm.
Here's the thing is everybody, we have the cat and the mouse inside of us.
Yeah.
We can't go looking and saying, okay, those are perpetrators and those are the victims. I mean, we can look around the world, but on some other level, it's inside of us.
Yeah.
It's inside of us. And unless we take ownership that the cat and the mouse are inside of us, and that in 1 minute we can act like the cat, and the next minute we're the mouse, okay? And one thing that I discuss in the books is, the people who one of the dangers of a strong identification with victim, it needs to be a conscious, and this, we're back to trauma again, it needs to be a consciously owning of that certain experiences or events happen that were challenging, difficult, awful, terrible, traumatic, whatever words fit, okay? But that's not who the identity is. I'm a person who had these experiences, and now I want to transform myself around them so that I can grow as much as possible. Maybe someone will feel
Hmm.
called to help serve other people the way former alcoholics help counsel alcoholics, and the way people who survive cancer help with group work with supporting people who are cancer. So the Me Too movement, there's people who mentor people who were, mistreated and violated in their office circumstances by power abuses, right? And so, how can we support and mentor people who have had those experiences to help them grow around and beyond that? And so they're not just stuck in a victim place forever. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. I just,
So I also, I write about the victim, and I have to say that I met not very many, but I met
mm,
people who wanted to be the victim,
mm,
who used being a victim to manipulate people around them to get what they wanted. And I
mhm,
write about that too. I didn't see it very often, but when I saw it, it was startling. Thankfully, more often what I saw was people who really wanted to grow and develop and grow around and shrink that stuff that was hurtful or scary or what have you. But there's some people who want to cling on to victimhood and use it for manipulation and use it for guilt and
yep,
use it to get what they want from other people or culture or society or what have you. And so we're a complex species, you know. And we've wandered down this kind of tunnel, um, um, and let's bring it back for a moment, and
yeah,
then we probably should be saying goodbye for the afternoon. But let's bring it back to, what are we really trying to say here? Are we trying to say that being human, just being human, is a challenge?
mm,
Trying to understand, who am I as a human being, and how much of me is kind of hardwired in my body, that I need to just understand that this is part of being the human species, and
mhm,
own it and take responsibility for it. And then the times that I've had as a person, as a human, difficult experiences, do I do my best to not let them become my identity, because that's a hard thing to live with. As I said, short term, somebody has to own it. You have to own it before you can transform it. So, okay, yes, I had this terrible, awful experience. I never talked about it before. And now I see people are starting to talk about it. Yes, wonderful. Find the right forum, the right support, you know, and talk about it. But don't get stuck there. It's kind of like the 12-step program. You know what the
mm.
13th step is addiction to the 12-step program. And so, I'm sorry, that's common phrase. And so I see this with kind of this whole kind of movement with healing and trauma and stuff, is there's so much good in it that we need to just keep focusing on the good and the goal. the goal, to bring in the good and the support and to move through it and to become a whole self, right? And to ensure that we're not using vulnerability and susceptibility to actually create another trap for the person, in which now trauma is on a pedestal, there's a hierarchy of them, and we're not going anywhere, not growing out of it and beyond it. We're busy pointing a finger as to whose trauma is worse.
Yeah.
Is this what we're trying to say?
I do think it's what we're trying to say, but I think we lack the words and the ability to thoroughly communicate what we want to happen. Maybe everything you see is you, and we don't have the ability or the cognitive horsepower to solve these problems yet. Maybe we're a species that's not quite capable of fixing these problems, but we're trying to. And all of our trauma leads to the next step in a breakthrough, on a species level. Maybe we're just not there yet.
Yes, and maybe we'll never get there.
Maybe you can't get there. Maybe it's the individual's journey.
Yes, and if we focus on the individual journey, that the person that we can transform, heal is ourselves.
Yes.
And for those who feel called to support and create a space and have let's say the training and the credentialing and the experience and the apprenticeship to be able to create space for others to do their growing in, then if that's the calling, then that's the calling. And these issues around vulnerability and susceptibility and, the language that we use and how we support people and how we're using our language so that it becomes the most supportive possible to the people that we are working with.
Maybe it comes to lineage too, like the way in which you've studied with Dr. Roberto and Stanislav Grof, and then you take the torch and move it forward a little bit. Then someone comes up behind you and they move it forward a little bit. Maybe it's
open. I'm shipping. Are you there? Are you out there? I'm looking for you. And yes, and always moving it forward.
Yes.
But keeping in mind that there's only some people who are going to want to be. Look at all the great teachers who came. They came, they taught, they brought the light, they brought consciousness, they brought ethics, they respect, they brought all of that.
Yeah.
And then they left and they left their teachings, and then people love their teachings and bring them forward. And some people take their teachings and use them for power and authority and control of people. And so the cycle just continues. Anyway, it's been a great conversation.
I love it. It was so much fun.
I hope we actually, brought the conversation, the discussion forward, and maybe aired out, got it out of the closet a little bit more. And hopefully it will provide more conversations about how to hold this space and what words to use and how to use those words so they become supportive and support growth and development and transformation in positive ways.
I think anybody who's listening to this should definitely go to your new website that has a wonderful flow of information, and the colors on there are perfect, and it kind of calls out to anybody who goes there. And when they go there, they can check out your books, Ayahuasca Awakenings Volume 1 and Volume 2, which are guidebooks that people can thumb through and find something that calls to them. They're wonderful. And I would invite everyone to go down and go to the show notes and check that out. But before I let you go, where is the best place to find you, and what do you have coming up?
Okay, well, if anybody's interested, I'll be in Ottawa on the 7th, December the 7th. I think I posted it on LinkedIn. You might find it somewhere. It's actually, for the last few years now, I just want to do a shout out to Dr. Ann Vallely, Dr. Monica Williams, and some others, those two particularly, then Dr. Paul Grof, but those two particularly who've worked so hard to put together I think it's the first graduate level psychedelics program at a University of Ottawa. And I had the great pleasure of being their first guest lecturer. I'm an advisor to the program and support it fully. So I'll be speaking there on Thursday. It's actually an interfaculty. It's to Paul Grof and I are going to be speaking in the morning, and then I believe the afternoon is some, I believe, graduate and doctoral students presenting some of their research and their work in the field. So it is, although it wasn't widely publicized, anybody in the Ottawa area, I'm not sure if there's live streaming, find it in my LinkedIn posts, and you're welcome to join. And other than that, I'm hoping to take a little wee break for a few weeks, and it's been a kind of a very busy period of time. People who are looking to find me, you can find me through my website. I may need to be a teeny bit patient. I check often, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I know a lot of people try to find me on Facebook or Instagram or some of the other places, but I'm really not busy on those. I really don't look that often. I'm not active on Facebook, although I do have a page for a specific reason. I'm really not active on it, so please don't be offended if I don't friend you. I can't keep up. So LinkedIn, I do regularly, so you can find me there on my website.
Well, fantastic. And I really enjoyed the time and the conversation. I really appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a wonderful day. And that's all we got for today. So ladies and gentlemen, aloha.